The air that afternoon had been still as glass, and I'd taken that as a blessing. We were camped in a bowl of sunburnt grassland, the kind where the hills roll low and dry, and the earth cracks under your boots. It had been 3 weeks since the last rain. The fire I built was small, almost timid. A neat circle of stones, flames no higher than my hand. I'd always prided myself on careful fires. A lifetime of camping teaches you respect for the power of even a single spark. But that day, I made one mistake. Just one. I left it for a moment. I remember standing by the creek, 30 yards off, washing out a tin cup when the wind came. It wasn't a steady wind, just one sharp gust that whistled through the cottonwoods, kicked dust from the trail, and breathed across the fire pit. When I turned back, what had been orange and gentle had turned wild. The flames were licking the dry grass beyond the ring of stones, spreading low and fast like liquid heat. My heart stuttered. I dropped the cup, sprinting hard, boots pounding the brittle soil. By the time I reached the pit, the fire had already doubled in size. The dry grass caught like paper. I stomped, grabbed the nearest shovel and threw dirt, each scoop exploding into sparks and smoke. The wind shifted again, cruelly playful, and carried embers farther out. Tiny seeds of disaster. Every second, the fire gained ground. I yelled for Sam, who was setting up the tent by the ridge, and he came running, eyes wide, already pulling the bandana from his neck to cover his mouth. "Water!" I shouted. He grabbed his pack, pulled out 2 bottles, and we poured them straight onto the flames. It hissed, spat, and barely slowed. My throat burned from the smoke. My hands felt clumsy and slow. I could hear the crackle, that dry, hungry sound that makes your stomach tighten, as more grass ignited in little patches all around. "Get more dirt," I said, coughing hard. Sam dug in with the second shovel, throwing earth like he was bailing out a sinking boat. I smothered what I could with my jacket, the canvas blackening and curling from the heat. Sweat rolled into my eyes. The fire wasn't large yet, but it was growing fast. The kind that could turn this little campsite into a headline if we failed. And the thought of that, of being the one who started a wildfire, hit me harder than the smoke itself. The smoke thickened, turning the sun a dull copper disc above us. My lungs burned as if I'd swallowed the fire itself, and my heart hammered in my chest, part fear, part exhaustion. Sam had stripped off his flannel and was beating at the outer edge of the flames, trying to smother the advance. Every slap sent sparks into the air, glowing against the darkening sky. The wind wasn't steady, but unpredictable. Each gust spun the fire a new direction, making it impossible to get ahead of it. "Grab the bucket," Sam yelled, pointing toward the creek. There was no real bucket, just an old cookpot. I sprinted, stumbling over a root, nearly falling face first into the water. The creek was shallow, barely ankle deep, but I scooped what I could and ran back, water sloshing out with every step. I tossed it onto the fire and watched the steam billow up, momentarily clearing a patch of earth before the heat flared again. I ran back for more. And again. And again. My arms ached. My throat was raw from breathing smoke and dust. We worked without speaking, the two of us caught in the rhythm of panic. Dig, toss, stomp, pour. The edges of my vision blurred from heat and fatigue. The fire didn't roar like in the movies. It whispered, hissed, and crawled, feeding quietly, greedily. It was almost alive, and it wanted to grow. Sam stumbled back from a patch of burning grass, coughing hard. "We're losing it," he gasped. It's heading for the ridge. That ridge. Dry brush, dead branches, and an open line of fuel to the tree line beyond. If it reached that, we'd be finished. No shovels or water bottles could stop it then. I looked around desperately, scanning for anything we could use. That's when I spotted the cooler, half full of melted ice and water from lunch. "Cooler!" I shouted, already dragging it toward the fire. We tipped it, sending a flood of muddy water over the hottest section. The flames hissed and retreated, only to flare again a few feet away. We kept at it until our hands shook. My palms blistered from the shovel handle, but I didn't stop. Every patch we killed felt like buying back one more second, one more breath of safety. But the line of flame kept moving, slow and steady, a creeping orange snake making its way toward the slope. Then the wind dropped, just like that, as if the land itself had taken a long, deep breath and gone still. The fire paused, uncertain, flickering low. We didn't waste a heartbeat. We threw dirt, water, even kicked sand over the blackened patches until there was nothing left but the smell of char and the dull glow of coals. When the silence came, it felt wrong, too quiet after all that chaos. The air shimmered with heat, our faces streaked with soot and sweat. Sam sat down hard in the dirt, breathing like a man twice his age. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The fire was out, but the guilt burned hotter than anything we'd just fought. The world around us was scorched and silent. The smoke hung low, drifting in thin blue ribbons that curled through the brittle grass. I could still feel the pulse of the fire in my fingertips, the heat that had seeped into my skin, into my bones. My shirt clung to me, heavy with sweat and ash. Sam leaned on the shovel, his face streaked with soot and disbelief. We'd done it, somehow, but the ground around us looked like a wound, black and raw, a patch of ruin in what had been golden and dry only an hour before. I knelt beside the fire ring, now little more than a pit of grey ash and cracked stones. My hands trembled as I sifted through the coals, spreading them apart, making sure every ember was dead. Even the faintest glow made my stomach twist. I built that fire with the same hands that had nearly destroyed this place. It was a thought that sat heavy, almost unbearable. Sam finally broke the silence. "You think it's really out?" "Has to be," I said, though I didn't believe it yet. We both scanned the horizon, looking for any sign of smoke, any trace of orange. The grass beyond the charred ring was blackened in a rough crescent shape, about 20 yards across. Just a little longer and it would have reached the ridge. From there, it would have raced through the brush and trees like a fuse. I rose to my feet and grabbed the canteen, pouring the last of our water over the black earth, letting it hiss softly. The smell, wet ash, scorched dirt, was something I'd never forget. It clung to my clothes, my skin, the air itself. Sam watched, quiet, eyes fixed on the ruined patch. "Could have burned the whole valley," he murmured. "Yeah," I said. All because I walked away for a minute. The weight of it pressed on me harder than the heat ever had. I thought of the families who might hike through here later, the wildlife that called this place home. The thought of being the one responsible for destroying any of it made my chest tighten. We spent the next hour circling the perimeter, stamping down anything that still looked suspicious. Every puff of smoke sent a jolt through me. The sun had sunk lower, and the wind had eased to nothing, a mercy I didn't deserve. When at last we were convinced the fire was truly dead, we stood there, side by side. watching the land cool. My mouth was dry as dust. Sam offered a faint grin, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "Well," he said, voice hoarse, "guess we'll be a little more careful next time." I nodded, but I couldn't bring myself to smile back. The lesson had already carved itself deep enough. As evening crept in, the light softened, turning the blackened patch of ground into something almost unreal, like a scar under golden skin. The wind had died completely, leaving a heavy stillness that made every sound stand out. The slow ticking of cooling stones, the whisper of a single cricket somewhere in the tall grass, the faint crackle of our boots when we moved. The air still smelled of smoke, sharp and metallic. It coated my tongue. I couldn't stop replaying it all. That brief, stupid moment when I'd left the fire alone. Sam was sitting on a log, elbows on his knees, staring at the burned crescent. He hadn't said much since it ended. His clothes were streaked with dirt, and one of his sleeves was singed near the wrist. When I walked over, he didn't look up. "You ever think," he said after a while, "how fast something can turn?" I didn't answer right away. I thought of how calm the day had been, how ordinary. A man could live 100 years in the wilderness and still be caught off guard by how quickly nature changes its mind. I sat beside him, the two of us just breathing in the silence. "Back home," I said finally, "we talk about responsibility like it's a thing you learn once. But out here, you learn it over and over. Every mistake costs something." He gave a dry laugh, not amused, just tired. "We got lucky this time." Lucky. The word didn't sit right. I looked out at the smouldered ground and thought about how close we'd come to lighting the world on fire. Luck had nothing to do with it. It was sweat, fear, and sheer desperation that had saved us. And the wind, mercifully dying before it could carry the flames farther. When the sun slipped behind the ridge, we got up and began to clean. We packed what we could, stomping once more around the blackened soil, checking for any heat. We poured out the dregs of our coffee water, scraped the ash flat with the edge of a shovel, and scattered dirt until the campfire was nothing more than a pale smear of dust. It wasn't enough to erase it, but it felt like something. We decided not to light another fire that night. Supper was cold beans straight from the can. We sat in the dim blue dusk, sharing the quiet, too worn out for words. When darkness finally fell, the stars came clear and hard above us, indifferent and endless. I lay back on my bedroll, staring up at them. The smell of smoke still caught in my hair. Sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the flames again, that low, crawling light spreading across the grass, the wind whispering, the fear in my chest. And underneath it all, one thought repeating like a heartbeat. It only takes a moment. Morning came pale and cold, the kind of dawn that feels like a clean slate, though the land didn't look like one. The ashes were grey and quiet, settled into the soil as if they'd been there for 100 years. The air had cooled enough that I could see my breath. Sam was already up, crouched by the fire pit, turning over the blackened earth with a stick. He looked up when he heard me stir, and for a long moment, neither of us said a word. There wasn't much left to say. We broke camp slowly, moving with the stiffness that follows both hard labour and too little sleep. Each piece of gear went into the packs in silence. When I picked up the shovels, their blades were still streaked with soot. The The sight of them, those crude, simple tools that had stood between us and catastrophe, brought a strange mix of gratitude and shame. Before we left, we walked the site one last time. I traced the curve of the burned grass with my boot, testing the ground with my heel. Cold. Dead. Safe. At least for now. The wind was gentle again, just a sigh through the brush, but it still made me flinch. Every movement of air felt like a warning. Sam kicked at a bit of blackened dirt. "You think anyone'll know what happened here?" "Maybe," I said, "but I'll always know." He nodded, tightening the straps on his pack. "We got lucky." That word again, lucky. I wanted to argue, to say that luck wasn't enough to cover what we'd almost done. But I didn't. Maybe luck had played a part, in its quiet way. Maybe the wind could have stayed wild, or a single ember could have found its way into the brush after we'd gone. Maybe we owed our lives, and this whole valley, to a small mercy from nature itself. As we started down the trail, the land stretched out in every direction. Gold, brown, and brittle. Beautiful in its fragility. I kept glancing back until the campsite disappeared behind a rise. It struck me then that the wilderness gives and takes in the same breath. It forgives nothing, but it teaches deeply. We reached the creek and paused to refill our canteens. The water was clear, cold against my palms. I splashed some on my face, washing away the last of the soot, though the smell of smoke still lingered in my hair and clothes. Maybe it always would. I looked up toward the ridge, where the sun had started to break through the haze, turning the world gold again. "Never again," I whispered, to Sam, to the wind, to whatever listening spirit guards the careless and the lucky. He just nodded. We walked on in silence, our boots crunching the dry earth. Behind us, the valley lay quiet, the ashes cooling in the first light of morning, a reminder carved into the land itself. A lesson I'd carry for the rest of my life. The fire we start is never as small as we think.